Hey everyone, it's the Kung Fu Genius, aka Alex Richter. If you're listening to us on audio only, I'd appreciate you reviewing and rating the podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you're watching us on YouTube, of course, if you like what I do here, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius and hit that bell for notifications. I have an announcement for Kung Fu Genius fans. Right now, for a limited time, you can get a 1-month all-access trial subscription to Wing Chun Illustrated magazine absolutely free. No strings attached after that free month either. Go to WCInewsstand.com to register in the upper right corner. Fill in your email and password and use the code KFG trial to get 1 month free access to all the issues published from 2011 to the current issue. How cool is that? All the issues. And if you want that information again, it's in the description below. And with that, let's get started.
All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all sorts of hot nonsense from YouTube. Lots of gems, lots of uneven dummy arms, and lots of, I think I just kicked this dude's hair off with my roundhouse kick. Let's get to it.
He is unstoppable, unbeatable, unbelievable. He's Alex Richter, the Kung Fu Genius.
And every day, I practice martial arts.
Watch out!
Word is, I'm a Kung Fu genius. Practiced all day like a genius.
Yo, Dre, how you doing, man?
Snap, seafood.
You're looking a little different. Last week...
I'm feeling much better.
But it's weird. You're acting like last week you weren't feeling well, but you were actually a lot more articulate, and I dare say better looking last week.
I was coming off a little stint of some a little food allergy, I guess.
Food allergy?
Yeah. A little bloated.
That's why you looked a little different?
Yeah. Little hair.
Got
hair.
it. Yeah, you grew
growth.
hair. Yeah, what happened? What happened? And then
weird allergic reaction.
Got it. But I kind of like that version better. But that version of Dre, that was all having an allergic reaction,
right?
Did the intro in 2 takes, and both takes were fine.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like a side effect.
So that means if you get some kind of food poisoning, you're actually better at your job.
Yeah, sometimes.
Interesting.
Depends on the food allergy.
So here we are with another AMA, another Ask the Genius, Ask Me Anything.
What episode is this?
I think it's episode 29, right?
So crazy.
Yeah, we're getting there almost to episode 30. We got some questions, right?
Uh-huh.
All right, let's go to it.
Yes. All right. Setting it off with my man Bruce JJ66. Regarding the recent Bruce Lee revelations, I wonder if Matthew Polly might consider releasing a revised version of the Bruce Lee bio in light of this new info. Somehow, I don't think Linda or Shannon would be open to giving new interviews. Any chance you could poly him on your show? I don't know if he is like a misprint or a mistype or just some straight Freudian or just some slang talk. Because back in the day, we would say, "Yo, let's poly. Let's get this. Let's get the let's poly." But hey, as for Tarantino's take on Bruce Lee, I completely agree that he should just admit that the once upon a time in Hollywood. Overall, I enjoyed the movie too, though I thought the ending was sad. We knew that wasn't how things went, unfortunately. Version of Bruce Lee was fictionalized. But it seems a bit hypocritical of Shannon to complain about that, considering the fact that all the Bruce bio pictures she and her mom have endorsed, including Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, have been highly fictionalized too.
Wow, there's a lot of stuff to unpack in that one, right? So first of all, about Matt Polly, right? So since we had Matt Polly on a very early, I think maybe episode 2, episode 3, something like that of the podcast. Yeah. And, I think people, they
with
go
a
like...
sidekick. He kicked the cab or some shit.
Yeah, that's right. I think, and then people are like, well, why doesn't he just come out with a revised version of the book, right? Well, I think people don't understand, like, Matt Polly is is like a serious book author, and he writes books that are published by major publishing houses. Like I believe Bruce Lee: A Life is from Simon and Schuster or something like that, right? And see, those are different from my books. When I
Not
write
like my book that I wrote.
not like your book,
Simon and Schuster.
written in crayon, stapled together,
Staples in the middle.
made in my basement. All right, with love, Dre.
Basement books.
Yes, basement books, right? It doesn't really work that way, right? So I've written a number of books on Wing Chun, and those books I self-publish. So
That's what's up.
if I write a book on the Chum Kiu or the Wooden Dummy or whatever, and I decide a couple years down the road, I want to update it, I want to revise it, maybe change some information in there, I can do it because I write the book, I publish it, I control all aspects of it, right? So there's no problem for me or like low-level authors to just go and make the third or fourth edition of their book something different or update it, right? But when you have a book with a major publishing house, it doesn't really work that way, right? Unless you're talking about textbooks,
So
which
dicey.
get upgraded or updated regularly. Like a biography, they're not going to do that. Like, oh, every 4 years, let's update the Bruce Lee biography, right? It just doesn't really work that way because it takes a lot of money and there's like a lot of machinations involved in changing that stuff, right? So I don't think that they're going to do an update to Bruce Lee: A Life. He tweeted, like that when these revelations came out, the Bruce Lee drug letters, that he's like, oh man, what a nightmare scenario for any biographer, right? You write a biography and some
Yes, I
4
remember
years
this
later,
tweet.
4 years later, all this stuff comes out and you're like, man, because had that stuff come out before, or had he been the first one to get a hold of that, that would have totally changed the take on how we wrote things, especially when it comes to those last few years, right? So I can't foresee that he's going to change that just because it's not really how it works with big publishing houses. The other thing is I would love to have him on again, but part of the problem is we have like the Bruce Lee drug letters video did so well, brought a lot of people to our channel, which I'm very grateful, but it also it also makes me feel like, oh, this is a subject we need to keep talking about. And in reality, there's a lot of other things about Bruce Lee that I would rather spend more time talking about. And kind of everything I wanted to say, I said in that first video,
Gotcha.
and there's really not a whole lot else to say. I read the letters and I'm like, you guys can make up your own minds about this kind of stuff, right? I don't think that there's a lot more new to say about it yet. I think maybe we need to find out if these revelations help us uncover other things that might come down the pipe. But until then, I'd rather go back to talking about Bruce Lee phone calls and Bruce Lee movies and Jeet Kune Do and stuff like that, and not like super dwell on this kind of stuff. So
Bruce Lee as a martial artist.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to have Matt Pauly back on. He's a very busy dude, and I try not to I don't want to be the guy like, hey, come back on my podcast, let's do it again. I don't want to be too pushy. People, they got their thing going on, and maybe if he wants to do it again, we'll definitely have him back on again.
Sweet.
And what was the second part of the question about?
Ooh, Tarantino.
Oh, Tarantino. Oh, right. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I already talked about the whole Tarantino thing in the last episode. Obviously, I think Tarantino should just admit it's a fictionalized portrayal of Bruce Lee and leave it at that, rather than trying to double down and justify it by creating some kind of oh no, this is actually based on a historical event or whatever, when really he just...
It was based on stuff that Matt Pauly wrote in the book.
Yeah, but it's not. And he's lying
That's
about
why
that,
I was
right? And he's also
trying to go back.
Yeah, and he's misrepresented stuff that was in Robert Klaus's book or whatever. The problem is he's doing a very bad job of trying to justify this thing as having been something that was real. But the person who asked the question had a very good point, that it's a little bit hypocritical of the Lee estate to kind of endorse or to go against the Quentin depiction when the official ones that they've endorsed have also been pretty fictionalized. Mm-hmm. And then he mentioned both Linda and Shannon. Well, to be fair, Shannon had nothing to do with dragging the Bruce Lee story, right? Shannon didn't take over the Lee estate until she's the one who took over. Linda used to be the one who kind of ran the Lee estate. And then eventually she let Shannon do it. And then Shannon has kind of gone her own way with things. And definitely there's, look, I'm not a huge fan of her. And I'm not a huge fan of what she has done with the Lee estate. But the one thing I can say is this, all right? To be fair to her, all right? I don't know what it's like to have a famous legendary father who died when I was only 4 or 5 years old, and then to have it thrust upon me at some point in my life to kind of handle that legacy. So like I can be understanding to her that like no matter what she decides to do, she's always going to have people who are going to criticize her or some aspect of it. Because quite honestly, if you do anything publicly or semi-publicly, even us, I mean,
you open it up for.
Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes I read the
criticism,
comments of what people write or why they accuse me of doing this or thinking this or whatever, and it's like people literally don't understand what's going on, right? There was a guy who was trying to argue with me in the comments today, in the Bruce Lee drug letters, right?
Yeah.
I wrote because there's never been a famous martial artist who ever did cocaine, and obviously. For someone who is even mildly brain dead or mostly brain dead, they would have recognized that as sarcasm. But the dude's like, I don't like, he literally took it at face value. And what's crazy is right after I say, oh, there's never been a famous martial artist that did cocaine, I put a photo of John Jones. Okay? So it's like as if you didn't understand that it was sarcasm. Let me put a photo of John Jones,
Right,
who also had his
right.
issues with cocaine, right? And the dude's like, you know, taking that thing at face value and go, no, it's sarcasm. And then what do people do? They got to double down. He's like, I didn't even like sarcasm anymore after high school. And it's like, you know, he's kind of saying like I'm using some kind of childish base humor. And it's like, okay, but you see how people are. It's like he clearly realized, oh, it's so obviously sarcasm and people cannot go, oh, my bad. And this is a recurring theme in the comments of like people, you know, like I literally had a pinned comment on there where I explain stuff like, no, the stationery, you know, the papers that he's talking about is stationary. I've done a couple updates in a pinned comment, and like I'll just write see pinned comment now at this point, right? But anyway, to come back to the whole kind of Linda and Shannon thing, all right? Really the main biography that Linda obviously signed off on is the one known as Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, which is highly fictionalized. And but that's Hollywood, and you know, with Hollywood, what Hollywood biopic have they not gone to great lengths to kind of dramatize? I mean, look at Oliver Stone's The Doors, or like, I mean, look, like you literally look at all of these, and like, which one of them are you going to go, oh, this is a great movie and it's super accurate, right? So I kind of get it with that. The one that Shannon, I believe, endorsed, because I believe this was during Shannon's watch, was that multi-part TV series in China, where they had Danny Chan, the one who's in Shaolin Soccer.
About
He's
3-4 years ago.
No, it's a little bit older than that now.
Yeah?
No, it didn't maybe hit Netflix until about 3 years ago. No, but it's been out for a hot minute. And it was a multi-part TV series from mainland China.
It's a lot of episodes.
Yeah, no, it's like
Okay.
it's like a TV soap opera, right? And
Gotcha.
it was in Mandarin, which Bruce didn't speak Mandarin. And so like, and it's with Danny Chan, who plays Bruce Lee in the Yip Man movies, and he was also in Shaolin Soccer. He's the goalie.
Yeah.
And he's still playing Bruce Lee in Yip Man 4. Danny Chan is older than me. Okay? I'm 43. He's older than me, and he's still playing Bruce Lee when Bruce Lee was in his 20s.
Right.
And you can kind of see he's looking
Yeah,
a little long
he's
in the
not-
tooth
he's
these
not-
days,
he's
right?
not that typical Asian looking,
No,
old
but I mean,
but looking young.
yeah, well, there's limits to it,
Yeah,
all right? I
it's-
mean, like,
levels
Asians
to this young
tend to
looking
age
shit.
a lot better than Westerners.
Okay.
But still, a 40-something-year-old Chinese guy cannot reliably play a 15-year-old Chinese teenager, all right? Like, at some point, Danny Chan is going to have to fire his agent and be like, can you get me another gig
Yeah, put that
outside
shit
of
on the
playing
shelf, homie.
Yeah, outside of playing, Bruce Lee, right? So...
Jackie Chan.
Exactly, right? So Shannon signed off on that. Mm-hmm. And that thing is probably the most inaccurate of anything ever done on Bruce Lee, because it's over, I don't know, 27, 30 something episodes, right? And but she signed off on it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is a very fair criticism. Now, obviously they want to protect Bruce Lee's image. So in the fictionalized accounts of Bruce Lee that have been endorsed by the Lee estate, Dragon the Bruce Lee story, and then this ridiculous TV series from China, they still portray him in a favorable light, even though the story is 100% BS. Like I was talking about Yip Man, right? The story is 100% BS, but they play him in a favorable light, right? But I think the problem is with the Quentin stuff is that it's obviously a hit piece because because Quentin doesn't like Bruce. He likes Bruce Lee, you know. As I like to say, the four-stripe Adidas of Bruce Lee imitators. For some reason, he thinks he's great. At least it's been told to me by someone who knows him. And so rather than him just admitting that it's just his, it's a fictionalized portrayal and he wants to make Bruce Lee look like an asshole, he's trying to double down and pretend that it's based on a true story. And so I think that's the main issue. But look, I'm not a huge fan of the Lee estate. So, there are a lot of people that don't understand a lot of the things that the Lee estate has done. Using Bruce Lee's name against some of Bruce Lee's students, against some of Bruce Lee's family members. And most of the people in the Bruce Lee Jeet Kune Do community are afraid to talk openly about it because sometimes they need to go to Shannon for something. And the thing is, I have no skin in the game, all right? But it's not too difficult for people to look into the kind of things that both Linda and Shannon have done to some of Bruce Lee's students and Bruce Lee's siblings. And I don't think that those things are all the coolest things in the world. So when they want to sell Bruce Lee bobbleheads and Bruce T and do these other things, okay, fine. But there's another side to the current iteration of the Lee estate, which I think is not all sunshines and rainbows, as Rocky Balboa would say.
Okay. All right. Let's go to my man Miguel C.
Miguel C.
Another awesome episode. I had a question. I really loved the Wing Chun shown on Wong Kar-wai's The Grandmaster. I was wondering what your thoughts were on the Wing Chun choreography in that movie. I know the story wasn't great, but I thought the Wing Chun was on point. Thank you, big fan.
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, I love the story of Wong Kar-wai's The Grandmaster.
Okay,
because
why is that?
I don't look at that film as a movie about Yip Man. Because, well, first of all, none of them are really about Yip Man, only as I've said multiple times. Yip Man, The Final Fight, is the one that kind of follows his life story the closest. Yeah. And I talked to Sin Guat Lam. Sin Guat Lam is the producer of those films. He produced Yip Man, The Final Fight. And also, like, yeah, I know Sin Guat Lam.
That's what's up.
And also Yip Man, the first one. And then so he asked me, he goes, oh, what's your favorite of all like the Yip Man movies? And I said, well, Yip Man, The Final Fight. And he's like, oh, that's also my favorite because it's the most accurate, right? So, and that's like coming from the producer, right? I mean, Anthony Wong is not like the martial arts presence that Donnie Yen is, but we're talking about a story about a senior-aged kung fu instructor. We're not talking about some indestructible super like martial arts ass kicker, right? So I feel that Anthony Wong did a much better job. But like that one aside, none of the movies about Yip Man really tell the story to any close degree. And some of the more recent ones are even more and more off the rails. So Wong Kar-wai's film bears little resemblance to the actual life of Yip Man, with the exception of a couple things. Oh, he's from Fatsan. He went to Hong Kong later, right? But I think the story is well written because Wong Kar-wai does good films and his films are well written.
Okay.
But you have to divorce your understanding of Wing Chun and Yip Man's history to enjoy the story part. So I actually find the story is pretty good. The choreography is okay. It looks really good because of the way Wong Kar-wai shoots movies, because he's one of Hong Kong's few art house directors. So he's got a very beautiful visual style to, when he goes into the meeting place in Fatsan and all the different masters challenge each other and like everything is very subtle and everything is shot in a really cool way. I like the fight between Tony Leung and Lau Ga Yong, the Hong Kong guy, right? Where he says, like, you Wing Chun people are, only three-trick pony, bong, tan, and fook. That's all you have, right?
Bong, tan, and
there are some really great lines in the Wong Kar-wai Yip Man movie. And some bits of the choreography are decent. One of the things that always bothers me, and again, it's always difficult, I've talked about before, like probably someone who's an expert sniper or special ops soldier probably has a really hard time watching movies where like the main character is a special ops guy, because they're like going like, no, that's not the procedure. That's not how you do this. That's not how this works, right? So for them, it's very difficult. And then maybe sometimes they cannot enjoy the story as much because of their specialization, because of their field, right? So I have to admit that that's kind of the problem with me in the Yip Man movies, is like I'm too close to the subject matter to be able to easily divorce what I know about Yip Man with the story, right? But I'm better at it. And with the Wong Kar-wai movie, it's probably the easiest for me to do it. But still, there are a lot of things like, for example, nearly all of the Yip Man movies got the Zhong Sao wrong. The pre-fighting position, the on-guard position of Wing Chun, okay? You know, in the Wong Kar-wai movie, he's standing there in Bong Sao with his wrist kinked as a starting position half the time. Not like he's starting in this way, which is idiotic, okay? All right? to quote Sifu Leung-ting, this is idiotic, right? And then Donnie Yen, God bless his heart, but someone please tell him to put his fingers together when he's doing the Zhong Sao, right?
Oh, just come by and just like...
He's literally standing with his fingers like this and going, and it's like, dude, all right? Put your fingers together. You hold your fingers like this, someone's going to grab your pinky and rip it off and show it to you, okay? Put your fingers together, all right? Stop doing this, all right?
Yeah.
Or as I like to tell my students, this is going to the hospital. This is not going to the hospital. This is going to the hospital.
Going to the hospital.
This is not going to the
every
hospital.
day
right?
with
Yes.
them joints.
And the reason why I find that really sloppy on whether it's the Wing Chun consultants or the choreographers is that we have photos of Yip Man's Zhong Sao. We have photos of Yip Man with his hands forward like this. You don't need to speculate or argue about, oh, this version of Wing Chun, that version of Wing. They're literally photos that exist. Just do that. You want to play Yip Man, then look at the handful of photos we have of him. Do something that looks like that, at least in the basic poses, right? And like almost all of the films, even Anthony Wong's film, all right? Like one of the things about this is he uses the Tan Sao as the Man Sao, right? And it's just like, close.
Close.
Not quite, right?
No
and so,
Cuban.
Yeah, exactly. So, those tend to be the issues I have with those films and why it's sometimes really difficult to kind of just sit and you have to kind of divorce what you understand from that topic, you know. So that is a big problem. But also, to be fair, I had the same problem when I was a kid. I used to be really into skateboarding, and it was sometimes hard to watch movies like Gleaming the Cube and watch Hollywood's representation of skateboard culture and be like, nah, not quite. I can imagine Gleaming the Cube, right? But I can imagine.
What about Kids?
Kids was more accurate, actually. Yeah, Kids was more accurate. But
I knew a few people from Kids.
Yeah, Harold Hunter, all those guys from Lower East Side. Dude. Yeah, crazy. I saw him once time in the Lower East Side. It was very shortly before he passed away. I remember him walking down the street because I knew Harold Hunter from the skateboarding days, and obviously he was in the movie Kids, right? Yeah. And so I remember I saw him down the street. He had a very distinctive look. And I was like, oh man, it's Harold Hunter. 2 months later, he died, and I was like, oh man, crazy. But like you watch Gleaming the Cube if you're a skateboarder and you're like, this is a Hollywood representation of skateboard culture. Mm-hmm. Just like when you watch the Yip Man movies, it's like this is a Hong Kong's Hollywood take on this kind of stuff, right? I can imagine breakdancers from the 80s just like watch a Break-In and Break-In 2 Electric Boogaloo and want to bash their faces into a table going like, this is not what breakdancers do, all right? But you understand what I'm saying? It's like, who can really enjoy those movies?
That's
like,
right.
The people who come to me and they're like, oh man, I love the Yip Man movie. They're so great. Almost never an actual practitioner of Wing Chun. They could be people who are into Hong Kong films and they can like and appreciate those things because they don't do it. And for me, brutal.
Next time I see Ken Swift, I'm going to ask him, yo, what's your take on Break-In 2 Electric Boogaloo?
Absolutely.
Yo. All right, pretty fly for a Filipino guy.
Our man.
He's back. That Kusang rabbit hole was dope. For a sec, I thought you're related to the comic book artist George Perez and that he did Wing Chun. That would be insane. AMA, speaking of wooden dummies, what's the difference between leveled and the uneven configuration of the arms?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, it's funny. On the last episode, I talked about my cousin George Perez had done Wing Chun in the 70s, right? Learned from one of Kusang's students, Alan Lam, and you know, he's the one guy in my family who did Wing Chun before me. And then I mentioned to him, like, oh, I talked about you on the podcast. He was like, oh, super cool. And then I saw there were a few comments about that because apparently George Perez is like, famous comic book artist, right?
I'm not sure who George Perez is, but I'm learning about George Perez.
Yeah, well, I heard that he's like a legit famous comic book artist, right? And then I sent my cousin a text. I'm like, yo, people keep asking if you're George Perez, the comic book, I guess artist or writer or whatever, and he's like, oh, I get that all the time. And
nice.
Yeah, so there's that, and then now the question is about the even and the uneven arms, right? So in the original wooden dummy construction, because you can imagine, like, for the layman out there, and I also don't really have the carpentry terminology to discuss this, but in the wooden dummy has 3 arms, and the 2 top arms are basically next to each other, right? And the problem is that the arms, they need to go through the wooden dummy, and they cannot go through each other at the same height, because otherwise, they go kind of in at a V, because they have to go out at an angle. And if they go in on the same height, they would literally be bumping into each other, right? So the traditional solution for that was you just have one a little higher than the other, and they kind of cross, just missing each other, which meant that traditionally the right arm, meaning if you were the wooden dummy facing out, the right arm of the wooden dummy is usually the higher one, and the left one is a little bit lower. And a lot of Wing Chun Sifus, including some of those in our association, they like the old uneven arm setup. All right, when you see the Tang Sang footage of Grandmaster Yip Man, or the photos, I should say, that dummy has uneven arms, and most of the dummies at that time had uneven arms. We just had one that was noticeably higher than the other. And apparently Grandmaster Yip Man didn't like that. He wanted the arms to be more even, so that you didn't have this discrepancy between the right and the left side. Because a lot of the things you train on the wooden dummy, you train them on both sides. Yeah. So you don't want to kind of artificially have it in a slightly different position on the one side than on the other side, when this is supposed to be the kind of standard movement. So the solution is, okay, can we get those 2 arms even, right? And so apparently Gusang was tasked to improve the dummy design to make the arms a little bit more even, and then he came up with the idea of having the offset on the arms, the part of the arms that go through the dummy, you have an offset, so the kind of arm is hanging off, and you can turn it so one will go up, one will go down, and then it'll kind of make it like even, a puzzle. Right? Yeah, like a puzzle piece, right? And that was already a pretty good upgrade. But the original Gusang even arms were pretty even, but not 100% even. But it definitely narrowed, it lessened the gap between the right arm and the left arm. And we have a Gusang dummy here, and you can see with the round arms, they're a lot closer than, let's say, the old school ones, right? When Sifu Leung-Ting started making dummies in the mid-90s, after Gusang passed away, he made the end of the dummy arm square, and he made the offset a little bit more pronounced so that the arms could be perfectly even. Wow. So that's why in that modern iteration of the Leung-Ting dummies, which are based on the Gusang template, the arms are a little bit thicker, and then they're squared in the end, so he can create the perfect uneven arms. You now have perfectly level arms, which means that there's no discrepancy between right and left on the wooden dummy, right? The cool thing about the Leung-Ting dummies is that you can actually take that right arm out and flip it and put it back, and you can have the uneven arms. So that's the cool thing, is that people who kind of like it old school can flip it. Now, Sifu Leung-Ting told me, or actually maybe didn't tell me, I think he wrote about it in his wooden dummy book, that at first he was somewhat opposed to the uneven arms, or to the even arms idea, because everyone understood that, one arm is higher than the other, and that's part of the design, and now you're changing the design, so it feels a little weird. And he said that he was like a little bit against it at first, but then eventually he kind of came to and realized, yeah, maybe it makes sense that the arms it's a practice device for your basic movements, and you should be kind of equal on both sides. So at the time of Yip Man's death, the arms were mostly even, but not perfectly even, from what I understood. And then years later, Leung-Ting kind of flattened out the design a little bit more, but you can flip the right arm over and still go old school. Old school. When I learned from Sifu Leung-Ting, he was very adamant on doing it with the even arms, and that's kind of how I learned it. Oddly enough, another one of my mentors, Sifu Carson Lau, whenever I would do the wooden dummy form with him, he liked the uneven arms. Okay. And then so he would take I always had him on even. He would take the right arm out, he would flip it, put it back in, and then so I would have to do the wooden dummy form with
flip the script on.
Yeah, with the uneven arms, right? Yeah. So you make a little bit of an adjustment. The interesting thing is, if you look at the original Yip Man wooden dummy techniques, so you look, let's say, at the 116 dummy techniques from the Tang Sang photo, the uneven design of the arms influence the form. So, for example, the right arm on the dummy, so if you're the dummy facing out, the right arm of the dummy is the higher one, and the left arm is lower. So that means when you're facing the dummy, the arm that your right arm is touching is the lower one. So that's why traditionally all the palm strikes done in the dummy form are done on the right hand are done high. Because you're doing it over the lower arm. So that arm is lower so you can hit high. Because the right arm is higher, you would circle around and then you would hit low. So the form was uncharacteristically uneven in that all the right palm strikes were done with the right high hand, or the right was a right high palm strike, and all the left palm strikes were done low. And that was not because of any super secret application or like, oh, on this side it's a secret death touch and on this side you got to hit over here. It was literally because of the construction of the dummy. That because if you want to stick to the dummy arms, you know, you go low on the high arm and high on the low arm, right? So that you're not going too high or too low or whatever, right? And so when Sifu Liang made the arms even, this was no longer a problem, and you can kind of freely practice, you know, on both sides. Of course, you could do it on uneven arm too. I mean, sometimes these distinctions come off as being like a bit pedantic, but that's a little bit of, you know, a little bit of the history of it. And I actually write about this in my upcoming wooden dummy book. I have a whole section about the even and uneven arms and all that.
Wow. Moving right along, actually, you know, my man Pablo Jose was asking, you have a cousin named George Perez?
Is this going to be the...
Does he write comics by any chance?
Every month I do an online theory class, which people can get a subscription for. It's about $19. And you can do this live class with me and ask me like questions, right? And there was one when someone asked me about The Final Master, that movie The Final Master. Yeah. And I kind of said how I don't really like it. It's a bunch of crap. And then like people kept asking me about that movie. And now it's like, it's been such a joke. And even like our big mega fan Topher, when he came and visited us a couple of weeks ago for the ITC, as a gift, he gave me the Blu-ray of The Final Master, right? So now I have a feeling that my cousin being George Perez is a comic book artist is going to be that thing for the next few weeks.
Have George Perez up on the show, but we don't know which one yet. All right, let's move along to my man Christian Creasy.
Awesome.
Okay. This was a great episode. I'm assuming he's referring to...
one of the episodes you're not in.
Yeah. Ooh. Stinger zinger. Ooh. This was a great episode. Here's a fun question. If you eat cheat meals, what is your favorite cheat meal? I hope one day I can get to come to New York and train with you guys. Maybe for an ITC.
Yeah, for sure. Well, next year's ITC is going to be the 20th anniversary of City Wing Chun. So it's going to be huge. That'll be in the summer, end of June. So it's a week-long seminar, and we're going to have like huge festivities at the end. So people want to come and train, can book the ITC soon before that thing is booked out. Yeah, it's going to be booked out. Speaking of subtle plugs. Right. Well, the thing about cheat meals, no. So maintaining your weight, it's about calories in, calories out. All right? And you can... you know, a cheat meal is still a cheat meal. Like, if you are eating less calories than you need, of course you can eat a little bit more, right? But I don't really believe in cheat meals, but I also don't punish myself. Mm-hmm. So for me, I eat according to my activity level. And I think one of the mistakes that some people make when they do cheat meals is they do cheat meals on their day off when they're not active. So literally the day where you're the least active is the day you're going to eat the most, and all of that stuff's going to just kind of go nowhere except be stored as fat because you're eating in a surplus, right? So for me, on the days when I'm not very active, which are usually my days off, which, spoiler alert, is my day off, which is only Sunday. Right. That day I don't do any cardio, I don't train, I just, spend some time at home relaxing or whatever. I actually try to eat the least amount on that day because my caloric needs are not that high because I'm not being active. So I'll actually eat less on that day. But on other days where I train harder, you can eat a little bit more. And the thing you always have to understand is you can never exercise away a bad diet. Okay, so if you hit the bike for 30 minutes and you burn 300 or 400 calories, depending on how hard you're going, but then you stuff 800 calories in the meal afterwards, okay? On top of eating what you normally eat. I mean, you burned 400 calories, but then immediately after you ate 800, okay? And then on top of that, you keep eating and eating and eating. So you have to understand, in order to lose weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit. And in order to maintain weight, you need to be right at that balance, right? So I'll have a cheat meal on days when I'm working really hard, but I don't ever gorge myself on anything because
Okay.
after 40 you really can't. You know, if I spend 2 days where I don't exercise and I eat, I literally see it the next day. And it's not all fat that you gain. You retain water. I mean,
yeah.
it's a lot of stuff that, it's not just, it doesn't turn into pure it's not 5 pounds
lot
of
more
fat
to
you
it.
gain, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of water weight and stuff like that. But so for me, it's something, I weigh myself every morning. I get up, I pee in the morning, and then I weigh myself. That way it's always the same conditions every morning, right? So pee first, and then weigh yourself.
You ever pee after your weigh-in and then...
Pounds worth.
The order is super important. It's like shower, shit, and shave, all right? That's not the right order, okay? All right?
Or maybe it is.
For some people.
People.
So I do it every morning, and that way if I gain a little bit of weight, it's not going to be all fat. Like sometimes I gain 5 pounds in one day. Well, it's mostly water weight that you gain. You didn't gain 5 pounds of fat in one day, right? It's like water, it's other stuff, right? But then okay, yesterday I ate a little bit more, and I kind of got a little, bloated as a result, right? So that day I'll eat a little bit less if my goal is to maintain. And other days I'll lose a whole bunch of weight, and I'll go, maybe today I can eat a little bit more, right? Because weight loss is not my main thing. It's more weight maintenance, right? So you have to play that by ear, and that's how I do it.
Let's go to my man, Daniel Williamson. I'm curious, Sifu Richter, what kinds of things you'd like to see upgraded about Wing Chun. I think there is a problem sometimes if the opponent feints and doesn't overcommit to a strike. Not just that, but footwork feints as well seem to discombobulate the system. That could be just my limited understanding, but I'd love to get your take on stuff like that.
That's a good question, and it's always the perennial issue of context even with a lot of Wing Chun practitioners, because you have to be very clear about what you're training. People conflate self-defense and fighting all the time, okay? All right, so now we're going to go back and forth, and, you're going to fake a couple jabs and not really commit, and the Wing Chun guy is going to stand there like a statue, and then the other guy fakes a jab from half a mile away, and he's going to step in with chain punches only to get cracked by a left hook.
Right.
All right, so there are problems with that have nothing to do with Wing Chun, okay? This is what we call user error.
User error.
So when it comes to self-defense, all right, or practical fighting, as I like to call it, the setup is a lot different. And so people always get confused because when they think about sparring, it's always in the sport-oriented frame. And I don't mean with rules and, I fight with no rules. I mean it's in the we're going to kickbox back and forth kind of way of sparring. And so goes almost no practical self-defense situation in the street.
Yeah.
Most of the time, as you can see from channels like Fight Science, right? Someone gets in your face, pushing and shoving. It's the kind of monkey dance and the posturing and all that kind of stuff. And someone takes a swing, and then the fight is on. Even look at like the fight we looked at a few weeks ago with Rasan and that weird Charlie Brown looking dude, right? They're two martial artists, right? The Jeet Kune Do guy is there in front of Rasan showing him, I can kick here, I can move here, I can do that or whatever. And the moment it goes south and it turns into a fight, there is no bouncing back and forth and checking the jab and going back and forth, right? So one thing Wing Chun people have to understand is, first of all, really traditional Wing Chun is not designed to go back and forth against someone with a kickboxing background, because, spoiler alert, there weren't any kickboxers in the Qing dynasty, okay? No Western-style kickboxers or Thai-style kickboxers, right? So some of the original context from which Wing Chun was developed was in a different mode of fighting. So if we're really talking about self-defense and practical fighting, we really have to learn how to put up our hands, create a frame, create a fence, and learn how to react very quickly to sudden aggression, okay, which starts at the verbal phase and all that kind of stuff, right? So that means that this idea that you're going to stand there with your hands forward in a Zhong Sao and your feet parallel waiting while some guy baits you with fakes or whatever, like, you're training wrong if that's what you're doing, all right? Your Sifu is not clearly making you understand what's going on. So if you are now going to do the thing where, okay, I'm Wing Chun and you're a kickboxer baiting me with feints, okay? Then you have to then train two ways. One, you modify the frame for the Wing Chun person to be a kickboxing frame, and then when the guy actually engages and comes in, you close the gap and then you use your Wing Chun, which is not a Jeet Kune Do way of looking at it, but it's a little bit closer to that kind of idea. Like, I'm going to move a little more freely and have feints and things like this at distance. And then when you come in, then I can use my Wing Chun, right? So you either go that route, or you stand with your hands in a zhong sao in an active pre-fighting position. What do most of the Wing Chun people do? They stand there with their hands up
still,
and they stand
style.
still. They stand still. Okay? And the other guy's moving around, building up his own confidence because he has a chance to move. And the Wing Chun person is there like a deer in the headlights. When you're in a real fight, you have adrenaline going through you.
Yeah.
And one of the things you need to do to keep this adrenaline from overcoming you is you need to move. All right? When you see fighters in the ring before they're ready to go, yeah, they're warming up their body, they're ready to go. But a big part of what they're doing is they got that fear. They have that excess. They have that adrenaline. Yeah. And you need to keep it moving so it doesn't overtake you. Because if it overtakes you, you're the deer in the headlights that freezes, doesn't move, boom, and you get run over. And most of Wing Chun people, they look at the pre-fighting position and they think, in Wing Chun, I stand here, I stay put, and I wait for the other guy to close the gap and I step in and punch them. Well, that might be a very simple trope that you teach the beginner for distance management, but that doesn't explain everything about how we do things. Wing Chun fighters who want to use the traditional Wing Chun zhong sao, all right, need to be much more mobile and much more aggressive when they do it. They need to get out of the idea that you're just going to stand there in what I call photo one, all right, standing like a photograph and wait passively for someone to punch you full power in the face. You need to be pressing the action right at the border. You need to make the other guy feel like you're about to go in, right? Yeah. And if the guy is baiting you with feints, there's tactics to get over that. All right, there's fighting tactics to get over what you call a timid or a non-committal opponent. But these are things that your Wing Chun Sifu should be able to teach you, right? And so for me, it's always people have a very base understanding of Wing Chun, and then they're trying to apply it in the wrong way, in the wrong situation. And then who gets the blame? Wing Chun. They always blame Wing Chun. Dude, she's been dead for like 400 years. She always gets the blame.
She always gets
Meanwhile, it's nothing but user error. She gets all the blame.
Poor lady.
Poor lady.
Wing Chun in application. I like the idea of beginners using the dummy and weapons to train techniques from the start so they get the proper feeling for rooting, structure, and accurate placement during application. Waiting too long to introduce them tends to lead to bad habits that have to be retrained away. What are your thoughts on the timing of introducing the dummy and weapons to facilitate proper understanding for application through feedback mediums?
That's an interesting question. I disagree with most of the premises of that question, however. All right, I see where Wing Chun in application is coming from, where Mr. Application is coming from, but I don't see that that's the solution. Okay, so obviously in real traditional Wing Chun, the wooden dummy is not introduced usually until the student has finished the BUG. Some middle period students teach the first 60 movements of the wooden dummy after the Chum Kyu or whatever. So your mileage may vary, okay? Some Yip Man Wing Chun schools, they teach the first 60 movements of the wooden dummy after the student learned the Chum Kyu, but most mainstream Wing Chun, they don't teach the wooden dummy until after you finish the BUG, right? For the most part, a lot of the schools that teach the first 60 movements of the wooden dummy after the Chum Kyu, often, not always, those tend to be people who came from the middle period. Okay. And in the middle period, Grandmaster Yip Man was said to have had a lot of personal issues. Okay, and so he wasn't teaching a lot of the classes himself because he, like I said, he was going through some stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it would appear, or at least it's speculated by some, that he would teach the wooden dummy a little earlier because he could charge for the wooden dummy so he can get a little more money. So it would appear that this kind of like teaching the first 60 movements thing it's not really accepted by most of the mainstream lineages as being the way you do it, right? It's usually done after Byuji. And also in terms of the system, when you understand Seonam Tao and Chamkyu are the operating system, that's really the meat and potatoes of what you need for the practical fighting in most of the ranges standing up and for the fundamental Chiso. The Byuji is a problem-solving form which solves two specific issues. And the wooden dummies finishing school to refine movements, reactions, and improve certain positions, right? So then the thing is, well, why do we need to wait so long to do the wooden dummy? Well, because a lot of the things that the wooden dummy reveals are meaningless to you if you have not gone through the other steps. Having said that, we do put the students on the wooden dummy a lot earlier here at City Wing Chun, but that doesn't mean that they're learning the form. They're doing other things with the wooden dummy. They're doing basic exercises, footwork, circling hand movements, scissors, gansao, kwansao, a lot of the things that are in the form, but we teach them piecemeal so that they have basically a partner to train with when there's no other partner to train with, and that can help facilitate better angles and positions and all that kind of stuff. The problem is that I believe that aspect, even for beginners, is overrated. Because I've seen tons of people have beautiful kwansaos on the wooden dummy, and that same kwansao falls apart under the stress of chisao sparring. So I don't believe that, this term structure gets bandied about a lot, okay? And for beginners that don't have a lot of skill or maybe don't have a lot of power, I would actually recommend them to think about fighting in another way, to use footwork and move. This idea that I'm going to root my stance so I cannot easily be pushed over. I'm going to have this perfectly structured tansao in the middle that's going to break everything or whatever, defies a couple rules of what happens in fighting. One, your attacker is under no obligation to punch or kick you in any kind of way that you want. Two, your opponent is going to go wild trying to punch you and grab your head and grab the back of your neck and hold on to you and put you in a headlock and
Straight
smash
savagery.
your face in and all this kind of stuff. So I don't think that learning the wooden dummy form earlier is going to help you solve that problem of violence. I think training the most important aspects of sparring, mainly what we call add-ons with the normal human behaviors in fighting. You got the runner, the presser, the chain punch stopper, the headlocker, the tackler. These are the common things that happen if you don't knock the guy out with the first punch. The students need to learn how to fight against those things. And they need to do it in a progressive way, start off easy and build up the pressure progressively. And the skills that you learn from having someone actually try to grab your arms and take you down, avoid your chain punches by doing common non-Wing Chun things that happen on the street, is much more beneficial than plopping a student in front of the wooden dummy and then showing them how to do kwansao, scissors, gansao, and cowpeck and be like, your structure is going to be impeccable, only for them to get pushed and punched in the face and those things not being immediately transferable, right? I get that it sounds good in theory, on the ground, boots on the ground, how people react to physical violence. All right. It comes through their practice of dealing with those scenarios with an actual partner. And there's nothing that putting you in front of a piece of wood is going to teach you about that pressure that you couldn't better get with
no
sparring.
pressure.
Yeah, that you couldn't better get with actual sparring progressively or with an instructor that can build it up step by step. Like they also do in better jiu-jitsu schools, like when the brown belts or the black belts are rolling with the white belts or the blue belts, they're doing it at a way that's kind of like at their level and they're building it up. And as they get better, they incrementally turn up the heat. Same thing with a good boxing coach. Same thing with any good martial arts instructor. That actual practice of using your tansao, fuksao, paksao, side palm, all of these kind of things in what looks more like the melee of a fight is going to teach the students more about using their Wing Chun than anything a wooden dummy can teach you. But when you say these things, because these things are holy tools that are going to teach you structure and teach you all these kind of things, the proof is in. I've been teaching Wing Chun for 20 years. I've experimented with different ways of teaching it, right? And the hands-on approach to actual practice and sparring yields better results than any magic structure you can teach them on the dummy. The weapons have good benefit for adding power and angle. The long pole teaches you a lot about the angles of Wing Chun because everything is magnified. But if someone is going to shove you and try to knock your head off with a right haymaker. And if that haymaker misses, they're going to come with an overhand left and they're going to shoot in for double and takedown. I don't think the most pressing thing for me to do is to put a long pole in the beginner's hands to solve that problem. Okay? And sometimes martial arts instructors confuse the things that are relevant in their own head, the things that they're using to improve incrementally over what beginners actually need. Okay? Because like for me, as an instructor, I separate what does this beginner that has no martial arts experience need to learn to start getting this versus what I'm currently interested in, which are things like wooden dummy pole, those kind of things, right? Or some advanced ideas in Wing Chun, right? It's a typical guru problem where the guru imposes their burden, their personal burden on the students, rather than really being there as a service provider, right? Students need to develop confidence. They develop confidence by learning how to handle those situations progressively one by one. You want to give a student confidence, show them what it's like when someone really grabs you so they can feel it, and then progressively show them how to get out of that until you're doing it at a pretty high rate of intensity. That's what's going to make them feel confident, not clacking away at a wooden dummy. They're going to clack away at a wooden dummy and you're going to say, wow, everything's, look at your structure, everything's really cool, everything sounds really good, you're really making the dummy sing. And then they go and they put the gloves on, they get smacked in the face. All right?
Damn.
Because, boards don't hit back. Dummy also doesn't hit back.
Dummy.
And that's all
no
I got.
pressure from the dummy. Wow.
Well, if you have a spinning dummy, I suppose.
Oh.
But you always know where it's going to spin, so it's also kind of whack Arnold's.
All right, moving right along. We got Ison. This guy always somehow, he's like pretty fly for a Filipino guy. He just kind of slithers in, right?
Except the pretty fly for a Filipino guy actually has good questions. And look, your job, Dre, is to filter the questions on the AMA.
You're right.
Okay?
You're
that
right.
way, because the reason why we did that is because so many people try to hit me up on Twitter at the Kung Fu Genius. So many people try to hit me up on Instagram at the Kung Fu Genius. So many people try to hit me up on Facebook.com/the Kung Fu Genius and be like, yo, can you answer this question? And it's like, write it in the comments of the YouTube video. One, because it helps the algorithm. And two, when we do the video, you just need to scan the questions in the comments.
Yeah.
You pluck them out and then you ask them. But you're also supposed to filter the nonsense. And last week, this Ison guy asked a very offensive question about Grandmaster Yip Man.
Word?
Yes. And I told you about it. And the fact that you're letting it come back in makes me start to think that you and Ison, there might be some connection there that I need to look into.
What do you mean? I don't know what you're insinuating. Let's find out what the question is, though.
Yeah, let's.
Let's see. Hypothetical.
That started off well.
Yeah, is that the whole question?
You came across a time machine back in your castle days. You were like in what, 20s? Ended up in a nightclub in HK with Bruce in the summer of 1973.
This guy.
Yo, that's what he wrote. Ison.
I literally can't answer that question.
Why not?
I can't answer
Hypothetical.
that question.
It's hypothetical.
There are lots of hypothetical questions, all right? Okay? That doesn't make them necessary to answer, all right? Yeah, no. And he turns it into like this weird, like that.
That's a time machine question. Those are fun.
First of all, Ison seems to only ask time machine questions.
No, he
But this
doesn't.
one is like, would you rather run over a small child with a train or a truck? I mean, like, what kind? Like, who's going to answer questions like that? All right? This is hot nonsense.
How come Dryson never gets his questions answered?
Because I'm suspicious of Dryson.
Oh, what?
Because you know what? Well, here's the thing. I deny certain questions. You know, you put them up there, and sometimes people ask some weird stuff. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to answer that. You never push back. But when I push back on Dryson, you're like,
I just think it's a good question.
I'm gonna have to edit the shit out of this. There's no way this is getting a good episode. Are you kidding me? This is for Patreon supporters only.
Okay. All right. Raymond Diaz.
Okay.
I just want to know if Bruce's energy was coming from the drugs or he was born with that incredible energy or both.
Man, people cannot give that drug video a rest. Is this going to be the rest of my life answering Bruce Lee drug questions?
Maybe so.
I don't want to be known for this. I don't want to be known for this.
Maybe so.
All right? Like Mikey Deane is famous for that one weird viral video that came out where he was dancing, and he can never live that up, right? I don't want to be known for this thing.
I've never seen this video.
Oh, I'll send it to you later.
Yes,
yeah,
please.
I got a couple memes too. No, so look, I mean, everyone's like, oh, did Bruce get all this energy from doing all the drugs? First of all, how would I know? All right? I mean, like, first of all, Bruce died a solid 4 years before I was even born. Mm-hmm. You know, and like, I realized like maybe I know a lot of Bruce Lee facts, okay? I can't tell you anything like that. All I can say is this. When Bruce was a child, one of his nicknames in Hong Kong was Never Sit Still, you know, because he had boundless energy. And like he seemed to have always had a lot of this energy and be very kind of outgoing and all this kind of stuff before this. And remember, I think what people are forgetting is timeline stuff. We talked about Yip Man and like how old he was when he actually started teaching. And like, I think like you don't need to be a historian, but you need to just have some benchmarks of timeline in your head. From what we understand about the cocaine use from the letters, now it's been a few weeks since I read them, we're really looking at after 1970, really 71, 72 on. So we're really talking about, let's say, the last 2.5 years of his life. Okay. So we're really talking about more or less the Hong Kong period, maybe a little bit of time before that. All right. That we know of. Okay. At least from the letters. Bruce, you know, people always, you know, you see the demonstration of him at the Long Beach tournament. That was years before that. I mean, he was energetic and he's doing all these things. That's years before all this supposed cocaine stuff, right? So I think people like, no one said he was doing it since he was 6 years old. Okay? So I think people just like, take a moment and just timeline it and then go, well, was he energetic before that point? Yeah, I think so. Oh, okay. All right? Am I the final word on Bruce's energy levels, on the amount of glucose he had available to him at any given moment? No, I'm an idiot. All right, next question.
If you answer
I hope it's not another Dryson question. Praise Odin.
Burial Daniel.
Burial or Barrier?
Did
Did you say burial?
No, barrier.
Barrier, okay, all right.
It might be Barrier.
Yeah.
Maybe like
no,
Perrier.
it might be. He has, as the French say, a certain, I don't know what.
Sorry, Barrier.
Sorry, Barrier.
From Marcellus.
A great episode again! Exclamation point. What's your feeling about Bruceploitation and all the clones like Bruce Lee or Bruce Lai, Dragon Lee, Bruce Lei, Bruce Liang, etc.?
So, as someone who's a huge Bruce Lee fan and someone who I love kung fu movies of the old generation, you know, throughout the various genres, right?
What's funny is all those dudes were in the Game of Death.
Right. Yes, exactly. I'm big into the old films, Golden Harvest, Shaw Brothers, Seasonal, all the stuff that came through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And obviously I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan. Never watched more than 2 of those fake Bruce Lee movies. I can't watch those. Because my brain as a child, as soon as I found out who Bruce Lee was, and I started reading about Bruce Lee, and I knew he only made these 4.5 movies. I knew this by the time I was 8 or 9. Okay, so my brain was like, when I see like, oh, Game of Death 2, I'm like, he never made Game of Death 2. Who's this guy? That guy doesn't even look like Bruce Lee. I was so offended by those films as a kid. Because I felt, and look, this is me as a 9-year-old. I felt like these adults are trying to lie to me. And I'm not stupid. I know that's not Bruce Lee. Why are these adults trying to lie to me? So I personally wouldn't watch any of those movies. My dad once actually got me one. I have to say I have one, and if you ever come over to my place, I have it on the shelf. My dad in the 80s, late 80s, went to Germany and bought a VHS in the PAL system for Europe at the time, because we had a multi-region player at home. And he's like, oh, I got you a Bruce Lee movie. He got it for me in Germany, which means it's dubbed in German, because they automatically dub everything in German, right? And I looked at it, and the German title was The Game of Death. But I looked at the dude on the cover, and like my 10-year-old brain is like,
what's happening here?
What's going on here, right? What's going on here?
Yeah.
It was like one time when I was very young, we had Christmas, we went to Germany, and I was like on the border of not really like believing in Santa anymore. And my dad thought it'd be a great idea to get me to believe still, because he wanted me to hang on to this belief, to get one of their buddies to dress up like Santa and come in and deliver the gifts. And the dude was wearing a plastic Santa mask. Okay, he wasn't an old dude with a beard like Rick Myers, He didn't have like the white beard.
Not the Kung Fu Santa.
He was wearing a plastic mask with a beard on it, and the hat was attached to the mask. And I remember seeing this as a kid and just going, oh, hell no. Okay? Because, you can fool some kids, right? But, kids are not nearly as dumb as you think, right? So I have, not to go too off topic, but I have, maybe it is the first time, I might have talked about it on the dudes, I don't remember. I have a superpower. I have one. Only one. It's not my ability to tell dad jokes. It's not anything martial arts related. It's not anything martial arts related.
I do know this one.
Okay? My superpower, and I dare say, it's more finely tuned than any other human I've ever met. It's I can, from multiple city blocks away, I can spot if a man has a hairpiece, a toupee, hair plugs, hair transplants. Put it to you this way. If there's any kind of f***ery afoot on top of someone's head, I will know about it without even looking at them. I can sit there. They can be in another subway train car, and I'll go like this, and I'll hone in on them, and I will go.
Who has the toupee?
Yes, I will go hair plugs. Yeah. Late '90s vintage. Okay. And I have an origin story for how I got this superpower. Okay. Because I was a very observant child.
It's always an origin story.
It's always an origin story. Look, when I was a kid, I would read all the Bruce Lee magazines from cover to cover.
Yeah.
And that's why I knew how many
Bruce Lee didn't have a earpiece, right?
I knew how much. How dare you? Wow. How dare you?
Wow.
All right?
I'm just making sure, man.
Okay.
Anything's popping up these days.
Yeah,
man.
We're going to find the Bruce Lee toupee letters. Yeah. Bob Baker was sending him cat fur.
Toupees.
And he was gluing it in his hair. And we're going to find this out. Oh, man. His world-famous eyebrows, fake. All right? Okay? Yeah. It's all going to come out, right? It's all going to come out, right? I read these magazines. That's why I knew how many Bruce Lee movies he made. So I learned from a very early age by reading. I learned to be very observant. Spot the fake Bruce Lee. Spot the fake Santa Claus with the plastic mask on. When I was a kid doing karate, must have been 9 years old. At that time, they didn't have like kids classes and adult classes. You were a kid, you trained with the adults. You sparred with the adults. And they didn't dumb down the karate training because you were a kid. It's like you know.
You getting your ass kicked.
No, I remember I was there and like our instructors like using like adult, like talking about, when you do the side kick, you have to use non-telegraphic movement. I remember hearing that at 9 years old and having to go home like, Mom, I don't know what non-telegraphic means. Because I
What
mean,
did she say?
no, I mean, like I looked it up and I had, because the thing is they're not going to dumb it down because they're teaching to adults, right? But I would go home, I would look up the word and then I would understand it next time I was in the karate class, right? And there was one senior student. He was a purple belt.
Senior.
Yeah. And he was a grown-ass man. Yeah. Most likely, in my mind's eye, okay, I was 9 years old. I would estimate him in his late 40s, early 50s maybe.
Okay.
We're sparring, right? One day, I'm like a yellow belt. He's a purple belt, right? Tall. He's a grown-ass man. I'm a kid, Hey, I'm learning how to kick. And I always thought something was weird with his hair, but I never quite knew what was going on. So I'm sparring with him, and I gave him a roundhouse kick to the head, okay? But I used, because even as a kid, I had impeccable controlled force. So I launched a kick, and I stop it short, and I do like I flick the kick out, and I bring it back. His hair blasts all the way over to the other side of his head, and he is as bald as a bowling ball underneath. And the hair was like all the way past his neck because homeboy had a comb over. I didn't know what a comb over was. That's why I always looked at his hair going like, what's wrong with his hair?
Yeah.
Because he was one of those dudes who had no hair up top and he grew it all the way out to here. And then he would comb it over and then give it like a once around bird's nest. All right? I kicked it off. The thing went flying to the other side. He was bald. And I screamed because I thought I had like scalped him because I didn't understand what was going on. I thought I'd literally like somehow magically with some maybe I'd been watching too many kung fu movies. I had like used
the wind of your kick.
Yeah, like I had like scalped them, like with a tomahawk or something like that, right? And I was like, oh, and I looked at him and I was like, I thought I had like damaged this old man because I didn't realize. And then he's like. He realizes the hair's down there, and he goes and puts it back, and then it's back to where it was before, and then I went, wait a minute. And ever since that day, even if you have the expensive Burt Reynolds hair plugs, and I'm half asleep, and you're 3 city blocks away, I will smell it. I will go, hair plugs, right there.
Yeah.
That is my superpower. I wish it was less useless. But anyway, how do we get to that? Yes. So for me, my brain as a child, I'm very visual. I just could not visually accept some fake-ass Bruce Lee. For me, it's Adidas with 5 stripes, okay? It's
5-stripe Adidas.
It's 5-stripe Adidas, all right?
We've gone up from 4
Yeah, we've gone up from 4, right?
From 4
well,
to
look,
5.
4-stripe Adidas looks weird to me, but maybe for the average audience member, I gotta say it's 5 stripes for them to understand, right? It's like someone's got Nikes, but it starts with an M, and you're like, wait, isn't that just Mike? All right, those are Mike. Wait, those aren't Nikes. You know what I mean? It's like you go to Chinatown.
Starts with an S.
Yeah,
Psyches. Psych.
You go to Chinatown. The guy wants to sell you a watch, and you're like, "That's a Rolex." Okay, that's not a Rolex. So I could never watch those movies. God. My dad brought me that was a Bruce Lee movie, L.E. from Germany. So first of all, it's
Quentin's favorite dude.
It's dubbed in German, which is like, and it's a fake like. I remember watching it as a kid because I watched it because my dad got it for me.
German kung fu flick.
No, it's a Hong Kong fake Bruce Lee movie dubbed in German with one of the fake Bruce Lee, worst fake Bruce Lees. And I remember I watched it because like my dad got it for me, and I love my dad to death, right? Watching this, and I'm like, this is janky. And like it just made me not want to ever watch those movies. So when people tell me about, have you seen the clones of Bruce Lee? Have you seen this? It's like, no, I actually can't watch any of those movies. Whether even if it's Leung Xiaolong, he's in Kung Fu Hustle, is kind of a throwback. But I've never seen him as a fake Bruce Lee. I can't watch any of those movies. I can't watch any of those movies. For me, they're just as terrible as Jimmy Wang Yu movies, but worse because like Jimmy Wang Yu is awful. But imagine you have like a fake Jimmy Wang Yu. All right, like for me, even though Bruce Lee was great and they're trying to imitate the great guy, for me it's just like. My brain just I can't say it's a Rolex watch. I don't want to wear a Rolex.
I don't think I've ever seen any of them.
No, they're terrible.
Yeah.
And some people are like, oh, well, actually, like this one, like, you know, was actually pretty good. And I'm like, no, sorry. I'm not going to watch any of them. These companies made them because they knew most foreigners didn't know how many or how few Bruce Lee movies Bruce Lee made. So their plan was actually, it wasn't so much for the Hong Kong audience. It was for the dumb Westerners, for them to think, oh, these are more Bruce Lee movies that you just hadn't seen yet.
Wow.
And most people didn't even know. And that's all I got to say about that.
Wow.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea kung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex Richter, always the...
All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all sorts of hot nonsense from YouTube. Lots of gems, lots of
Freudian slips.
shout out to my steroid users.
All right, so.
You came out of the traps quickly with that one.
Yeah,
and
what's
then
going
it just
on?
kind of
What's going
glitched.
on here? Is there something we need to know about? What's going on?
All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be going over. Wait, was it? The genius
dear
will
God.
be
Answering all sorts of
answering
hot
all sorts of
nonsense
hot
from
nonsense.
YouTube.
All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be going over. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Shout out to Ed Bassmaster.
Who's even talking to him? Do I even know this guy? Who is this
I
guy?
have no idea who this guy is.
All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be answering all sorts of hot nonsense from YouTube. Lots of gems, lots of uneven dummy arms, and lots of, yo, I think I kicked this dude's hairpiece off his head with my roundhouse kick. Let's get to it.
Why did he turn into Bill Cosby at the end? He turned into Bill Cosby.
I think I kicked this dude's.
Straight in the pudding pop.
I think I kicked this dude's pudding pop off.
That was dope. That was dope. Kick.
I had to do the Cosby
That was
kick.
fucking dope.